All right, so I'm a postdoc at the University of Oxford. There's a lot that goes into that. It's a very busy thing for me. I'm working under Dr. Kevin Foster. I'm a fellow at a beautiful college full of wonderful people. Really fun. A few weeks ago, someone in the Department of Biology emails me, and they say, "Hey Jacob, we're about to start a new seminar series in the department. We've heard you do a good talk. Would you be willing to open the series for us?" And this is Oxford's Department of Biology. This department basically created modern evolutionary theory. Everything from why sex exists, to why animals sometimes sacrifice themselves for their relatives, to the gene's eye view of evolution, all of that and much more comes from this department. Now, I try to limit how many talks I give because it takes away from your lab work, and I like to prepare and do a good job, and it just takes a lot of time. But the more I got to thinking about it, the more I realized some of the brightest minds in evolution are going to be in this room. And the name of the talk was Theoretical and Experimental Biology, a place to discuss new results and research ideas in evolutionary biology, which is great because I have a new research idea, or at least my mom does. So in the early 90s, my mom did a PhD here at Oxford. She studied insect behavior. It was really fun. One day at lunch, she asks her friends, "What do you guys think pubic hair is for?" Fast forward 30 years, my mom is now writing a book. It's called Anxious and Hairy. It's about the evolution of all human body hair, not just pubes, and it's coming out this summer or autumn 2026. And it's been so cool for me to see the process of her getting an agent, getting a book deal, getting translation rights. I didn't know this, but Russia and Hungary are very interested in hair. But the craziest thing for me is that in the 30 years since my mom asked her original question, no one's done anything on pubic hair. It's still a mystery. Now, Mom's book discusses some ideas, but those ideas need to be refined. And this seminar series would be a great way to do that. So I decided, okay, I'm going to do a seminar on the evolution of pubic hair. So I inform the organizers, I start preparing, I'm really excited. And a few days later, I get an email which says, "Hi, Jacob. We've decided we're not comfortable with you presenting on that topic. Please choose another one." So I went and I found the people who sent this email, and I said, "Why? What's wrong?" And they told me that they were concerned it would look like we weren't taking things seriously. And that really bugged me because you know what? I'm not interested in pubic hair because it's a funny topic. I'm interested in it because it's a good mystery. Why is it there? Why is this little tuft of hair evolved? So I talked to some people. Some people told me, "Be careful, Jacob. What you do here may influence the course of your career." I went home and I thought about it and I decided, you know what? This is a legitimate question. I'm just going to do it. And Department of Biology, please don't hate me. Now, I'm nervous going into this talk. You might pick up on that. But I decided to just play it for you and let you see what this is like. And to be clear, being a postdoc means nothing in this room. This room is full of older professors in evolutionary biology. So the start of this talk is me trying to convince them that this is a valid area of questioning by slowly walking towards the topic of pubic hair. I call this the common ground strategy. When you're talking about something challenging, a big new idea that's a little out there, you don't just drop the bomb at the beginning. You don't start with pubes, 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 because people might reject what you're saying before they've started to think about it. Instead, start with the common ground. Start with ideas that are commonly accepted and slowly walk towards the challenging stuff. So yeah, I thought you might enjoy being in the room and seeing what this is like, and I would love to hear your thoughts on my talk and my mom's ideas about the evolution of pubic hair. I almost forgot. I'm wearing a microphone throughout the talk, luckily, because the day of, I showed up early and someone from the department was there, and they prevented me from using the recording equipment in the room. So I have a microphone, we brought a camera, but you can't hear the audience, and I'm sorry about that. But as people were shuffling in, I had this feeling. You ever get this feeling where when you're about to do something scary, just before it happens, you think to yourself, why did I do this? I had that feeling, big time. Okay, on with the talk.
Okay. Before we get into today's topic, I want to tell you a story which is famous in my family and might give some context for why we're talking about what we're talking about today. So in 1993, my mother, Judy, just finished her undergrad in Guelph in Canada. And she moved across the pond to Oxford and she started a PhD with Bill Hamilton, W.D. Hamilton. Now I know there's some people here from outside the field. So Bill Hamilton was kind of like a Stephen Hawking, Richard Feynman figure. He made big contributions to the field of evolutionary biology, several big contributions. In her PhD, my mom studied sexual behavior in this obscure group of insects called Lepinotis. And she convinced Bill to take her on as a PhD student because she found this paper from the 20s that suggests that the females sing like songbirds almost to the males to convince the males to mate with them, which is, of course, the opposite of what we often see in nature. So that got Bill's attention. And in her PhD, she worked out the details of this, and I think it was an awesome time for her. But in the first week in Bill's lab, in the old building, she had a conversation which I think had a big impact on the course of her life. I'm going to read you now some of my mother's words. In those days, tea was served in the Department of Zoology around 4 o'clock. Tea time conversations usually revolved around what we all loved most, science. I listened and asked questions, enthralled with the open dialogue. Does anyone have ideas about pubic hair? I asked. I was nervous how my strange question would be received, but no one batted an eyelash. I might have asked for meal suggestions. Maybe it reduces friction, someone said. Isn't it to communicate sexual maturity? Maybe it's just insulation. It seemed to me like these scientific researchers had launched into discussion about a phenomenon every one of them knew intimately, yet had never properly pondered. Most of them had never seriously thought about it before. Have you? That's taken from the opening to my mom's up-and-coming book, Anxious and Hairy, which is due to be published this summer, July 2026. This book's all about the evolution of human body hair, not just pubic hair, but head hair, eyebrows, armpit hair, etc. It's also about our discomfort with our hair, our angst about the topic. And in keeping with that discomfort, my mom found that while there's been some decent work done on the origins of head hair or armpit hair, there's nothing, absolutely nothing out there on pubic hair. As a species, we've really spent more time trying to understand the spikes on damselfly penises or the tail feathers of birds than we have the sexual plumage of our own species. So today we're going to dive into pubic hair. I'm going to follow the arc of my mom's chapter for the most part. We'll discuss some ideas and maybe get into some experiments. And I think the idea of TEEB is that we work on ideas that are being developed. So if anyone has any ideas, at the end of this, I'll flash my email up. And if you're not brave enough to ask a question or talk to me, or something comes to you tonight in bed, please shoot me an email and let me know what you're thinking. So we start our journey not with hair, but with skin. So the outer integument of an organism is incredibly important to its survival and fitness. And as anyone who studies bacteria will tell you, outer membranes are a huge target of natural selection, right? It's the first thing a parasite binds to. For an antibiotic, it's often the first thing it targets. They're hugely important, and it makes sense, right? This is the thing that stands between the organism and the world and everything in it. They're similarly important in animals. Scales, feathers, hair, integuments are diverse, highly specialized, and often highly adapted to their environment. They can serve as armor, be involved in gas exchange. This frog, of course, is breathing through its integument. They're a critical site for thermoregulation. Right? This is where heat can be lost or retained. They can serve as a disguise, attract a mate, or deter a rival. This male gelada has a pretty remarkable integument, right? The puffy hair, the red chest. But there's another primate that I think arguably has an even more distinct integument. It's not the hair it has so much as the hair it doesn't have. The human ape, unlike all other primates, is naked-ish. We actually have a similar number of hair follicles as a chimpanzee per square centimeter. Less than a macaque, but similar to a chimpanzee. And that's not just true for our forearm, but also true for our chest, back, forehead, and thigh. The reason we look naked relative to a chimpanzee is because most of our hairs have shrunk and become very fine, very small. If you look at part of your body under a magnifying glass, you'll see them. Between the larger hairs, these small little tiny guys poking through. These are called vellus hairs, and they're different from the longer, thicker terminal hairs that cover a chimpanzee's body. Now, we still have terminal hair in a few discrete patches. This figure is actually a map of terminal hair growth on the human ape. There's a lot of variation within the species of the human ape, but the general patterns tend to remain the same, and some patches are consistent. Head hair, arm hair, pubic hair are always there. Why did we lose the rest of our hair? I'll save most of the details for my mother's book, but in brief, one major clue is that we have the most sweat glands per square centimeter of any mammal. To sweat is human, and hair interferes with the efficiency of sweating, which might suggest why it was lost. The two may go hand in hand. Whatever the driving force is behind our hair loss, these are the sites that natural selection spared when it deforested our bodies. And not only did it spare them, but these patches are more elaborate on the human ape than they are on other species, than they are on our ancestors. Chimpanzees do not have head hair. The hair on their heads is the same as the hair on the rest of their bodies. They do not have eyebrows, and they do not have pubic hair. I've given this guy a little modesty circle as we inspect the area. He has tummy hair, but there's no prominent bush like you would find on a human. Neither is there on this female orangutan. Neither is there on this female bonobo. This demands an explanation. Now, when you ask these kinds of questions in biology, it can be helpful to start with Tinbergen's 4 questions. This is a framework from the 60s for understanding a biological trait. Basically, we can ask proximate questions, right? How does the trait develop within an individual's lifespan? Or how is the trait mechanistically produced? How does it mechanistically work? And we can ask evolutionary questions. Why did the trait originally appear in the phylogeny? How does the trait currently influence the fitness of the organism? Now, my mother and I were interested in these evolutionary questions, but it can be helpful to start with the proximate, especially because one of the first things we should address is whether pubic hair is a developmental byproduct, right? Something like the male nipple. Nipples, of course, appear on an embryo before sexual differentiation really starts. So in a female embryo, they then become more developed and larger. On a male embryo, they stay small. So how does pubic hair develop? Not in the embryo, nor on the baby. Pubic hair doesn't appear until puberty because the hair follicles in the pubic region have receptors which bind to androgens like testosterone. And when those ramp up in puberty, hair begins to grow. I found this cool little puberty chart which lists a lot of different things that happen during puberty and when their onset is. The point here is that pubic hair doesn't seem to be a developmental quirk of one sex or the other. It's on both sexes, and it seems to be highly coordinated and tightly regulated with sexual maturation, which to me suggests some role in reproduction. And because it's not present on chimps and our ancestors, it seems to be a relatively recent thing. It's a human thing. So what is it doing? Hypotheses for the adaptive benefits of pubic hair fit into one of 3 categories. As a visual sign of sexual maturity, some protective utility, either from friction or from cold temperatures, or as an aid to obtain or keep good mates. Now, to be clear, there's no evidence for any hypothesis in any of these categories. All we can do right now is speculate. But we can use evolutionary theory in this discussion. We can poke holes in some of these ideas and see if any of them are left standing. To win in this game, a hypothesis really needs to do 2 things, right? Of course, it needs to explain how pubic hair benefits the wearer or their kin. But I think it also needs to explain the odd location of pubic hair. It's not on the genitals, it's above them. I think that's an important clue. So let's begin. First up, sign of maturity. For much of human history, choosing a recently fertile partner to have offspring with might mean that they're still around to help with grandchildren, which could certainly be adaptive. Many cultures have considered teenage marriage appropriate, including in ancient Greece, where the average woman lay in her marital bed by 14 to 16. The idea is perhaps it's adaptive to start as soon as possible. And pubic hair is indeed a signal of sexual maturity. The problem is there's lots of other signals of sexual maturity, right? Beards, breasts, voice change, body size, body shape changes. If we lost our pubic hair, I'm pretty sure we'd still be able to figure it out, right? Our primate ancestors certainly don't need pubic hair to figure it out. So I think this might work for number 2. It might explain why it's in a more visual position. but I'm not convinced it works for number one. So we're going to move on quickly here to protection. And we'll start with friction. From a male perspective, I think a protruding genital might be more likely to be irritated by pubic hair than not. There's a funny anecdote in my mom's chapter on pubic hair about a Bukhari man who was annoyed by his penis touching the ground whenever he squatted. So he came up with the brilliant idea of tying a cord around his waist and tucked his penis into it up against his tummy. Solving one problem, he created another. Apparently when he walked, he got a horrific case of chafing, so much so that he, for the first time in his life, cut off the pubic hair. It wasn't helping with the friction, it was perhaps adding to the problem. Could pubic hair reduce friction during sex? Well, during research for her book, my mom interviewed several people with full body alopecia, and she asked them about the struggles of not having any hair anywhere in their body, and she made a point to ask about pubic hair, and none of them reported any issues with friction or rubbing in the site, and I've certainly never heard anyone who shaves their pubic hair complain of friction or rubbing during sex. Perhaps more reasonably, it plays a role in insulating the area. Warmth is required for good circulation, and circulation and blood flow to the genitals is, of course, important. It's required for an erection. It's required for engorgement and swelling of the female genitalia. But a quick look at an anatomy figure tells us that the blood vessels involved are coming from deep within the body. What is pubic hair insulating? It's insulating this bone, right? It's not doing much. So I'm not sure this stands up to close inspection either. Which brings us to the last group. And within this category, there's one standout idea from Professor Hamilton himself. My mom asked him about this in her PhD, and he took a few weeks to think about it. And this is what he said. This is what the man known as Nature's Oracle said. I think pubic hair is an honest signal. Why? My mom asked, knowing that an honest signal typically describes a cue of quality that cannot be faked. Pubic hair could act as a scent trap, Bill explained, a catcher's mitt for any stray odors from sex with another lover. A mate could detect infidelity by smelling the genitals.
Okay, real quick, a note on Bill Hamilton. This is Bill's collected works. It's called Narrow Roads of Geneland. And look at this book. There's a bee going down a road with DNA chromosomes as clouds in the sky. You can see why they needed Richard Dawkins to make these ideas popular. This wasn't going to do it. Bill was especially famous for coming up with ideas which sound crazy on the outside, but the more time would go on, more often than not, he would turn out to be right. For example, he'd say something like, you know why the tree's leaves change color in the autumn? Because the trees are communicating their genetic quality to parasites. Or he'd say, you know why that cloud is there in the sky? Because a microbe in that lake is manipulating that cloud and using it for dispersal to other lakes. These ideas sound nuts, okay? But as time went on, evidence would build and build, suggesting he was right. I think he liked saying things that sounded crazy. He liked waiting for people to catch up to him. So even though this idea about pubic hair sounds nuts at first, hear him out. Be very careful betting against Bill Hamilton. Often, not always, but often, he comes out on the side of truth. Okay, back to the video.
Basically, what he's saying is that pubic hair could be a lie detector for cheating, right? Or infidelity, extra pair copulations, as they're known in the field. Before we talk about whether that works, Bill's obviously making a bunch of mechanistic assumptions, right? He's assuming that distinct couples have distinct sex smells. He's assuming that those smells get onto the pubic hair, and he's assuming that people can distinguish them. For the time being, if we assume that's true, which is saying a lot, let's see if this lie detector hypothesis holds any weight. Could it explain how pubic hair falls under positive selection? Now, we're about to talk about human mating systems. So as a brief disclaimer, these are so messy, they're so variable, they're so different across cultures. But in this talk, there's some fundamentals we can stick to. One of those is that human babies take a lot of resources to raise, both protection and food, and they're vulnerable for a very long time. So much so that it often takes multiple adults to raise a child. Not necessarily the parents, but from an inclusive fitness perspective, parents certainly have the most incentive to be involved in their child's upbringing. And many other animals are in this situation, right? Parents that need to look after their young in some way. To stabilize these relationships between parents, we have pair bonds. We have things like oxytocin after sex. We have jealousy. And so to imagine the kinds of conflicts that can arise in this situation, imagine that you and your friend decide to start an allotment together, right? You're going to share the workload and you're going to split the vegetables. But weeks in, you discover that your friend, Gladys, has two other friends, and she started an allotment with them at the same time, and she didn't tell you about it. And an allotment is a lot of work, right? And you know what's going to happen. And sure enough, Gladys starts missing watering days at your allotment, and you have to pick up the slack on your own, and that's not what you signed up for. That's cheating, right, in the world of gardens, but also this is a decent metaphor for cheating in the context of pair bonds. The baby you have with your partner is like an allotment, and if your partner is spending a lot of their time at other people's allotments, that's less time they're contributing to your allotment. That's why we get jealous. That's why this male frog is mate guarding this female frog. He wants to make sure Gladys doesn't go to a different pond. That's why this male penguin got kicked out of the nest by this female penguin. He was double dipping and he got caught, and she made a different mate choice. And the old penguin actually gets violently beaten by the new penguin. It's a violent thing if you watch the video. That's the world into which Bill Hamilton's idea lands. The world of pair bonds, fidelity, extra pair copulations, and monitoring your partner. What is my partner up to? So to test Bill's idea, let's say you're a male bird and there are two females in your life and you have 3 babies with each of them for comparison's sake. We'll start with the male perspective and then we'll go to the female one at the end. Now, one of these females has a blinker on her head, which is finely tuned so that if she ever cheats, it turns red. And it's green right now, which means she's faithful. And this, of course, is what Bill Hamilton is saying pubic hair is, a lie detector for extra pair copulations that is fairly accurate. The other female, she doesn't have that trait. And so her recent mating history is more ambiguous. And that ambiguity extends to her offspring. You're pretty sure these are your kids, right? Because this has never gone red. But those kids on the right, you're a little bit less certain about paternity. Now, if you, as a male bird, provide more care to the chicks on the left than those on the right, in keeping with your confidence about paternity, then yes, in theory, this could be under positive selection, at least for female chicks. The blinker will be inherited and they'll receive more resources from their father than the other group. So on paper, it may work, but do we see anything like this in nature? My mom and I have looked through the literature a lot. There's one paper, I think, that gives some clues here. This is a really cool study. 12 years, Lundy Island. They follow hundreds of sparrows, males and females, and they genotype everyone. And it's a small enough island they can do this. They can get 96% of all the chicks, all the adults. And so they know everything. They know which chicks are the product of cheating. They know who their parents were. They know who the cheaters are. And their main observable was how often the male visits the nest to feed his chicks, how often he provides paternal care. Here's what they found. For every standard deviation increase in unfaithful conception, so kids the product of cheating, there's about a standard deviation decrease in paternal care. And the simplest explanation for this, of course, is that the male is looking at that red chick and he's saying, that's not my kid. Like, I'm not going to feed these guys. So to control for that, they took a faithful female and they swapped out all of her babies for foreign chicks. And in this situation, the male didn't change his feeding at all. He fed them just as much as he was before when they were actually his offspring. So this heavily suggests that there's something about the female. There's some cue of her fidelity that the male is responding to. And the authors speculate on what that cue could be, feathers in the female's oil, or just how much time she spends away from the nest, more simply. But the fact that such a cue exists might suggest that Bill's idea is at least plausible. Now, does this work from the female perspective? I'll be frank with you, I've got a harder time wrapping my head around this version, right? remember the lie detector has to benefit this male's reproductive fitness relative to that one. So is there anything in principle that a female can do to positively impact this male's fitness or negatively impact that male's fitness based on a display of their fidelity? One thing a female could potentially do to, let's say, quote unquote, punish an ambiguous male is respond by cheating and turn herself. That could impact his reproductive fitness. She could also choose a different partner, like the penguin, which could certainly deny the male access to future reproduction with her. That could be a hit to his reproductive fitness. And perhaps that might have deeper consequences in a social primate, where getting kicked out or getting pushed away from your partner by another male might lead to a drop in your place in the hierarchy or something. But really, there's so little research on how females respond to cues of fidelity. As more research is done, perhaps Bill's idea will start to look more or less plausible. But in the meantime, I think there's potential here. It may work for one. It may also work for two. Let me give you a brief idea of what I mean. If Canada and the United States are mating, then if they separate, the pointy part of Ontario may come to rest on top of Michigan, if you know what I mean. Pubic hair, I think, is actually very well positioned to capture material from intercourse. There's one more point I have to mention. My mom found this study from the 60s where they explored whether apocrine glands in the pubic region produce their own sweat and odors. And you might expect that if pubic hair is a catcher's mitt for smells, it may not produce its own. If it did produce its own, they might mask or cover up the signals that it's meant to collect and display. And sure enough, this paper says that glands exist in the region but do not appear to function. I think the word atrophy was used. But this is just a tiny paper from the 60s. There's no diagram. It was just a brief note. So this would be a great place to start with a follow-up. Perhaps it's not a place to start, but this would certainly lend some support to Bill's idea. An easier place to start would just be to test these assumptions, right? You could have some couples collect swabs after sex, bring them into a lab, see if they can distinguish their own smells from the smells of other couples or from mixtures. But if anyone has any other ideas about experiments that could be done, please shoot me an email. Feel free to take a picture of that. And thank you for your time.
So that was my talk on pubic hair. I hope you enjoyed it. There were a bunch of questions. You can't hear them because I wasn't allowed access to the room's audio, but there's a few that I want to highlight. First, someone asked, how recently in evolutionary history did the human ape acquire pubic hair?
It's a great question. I remember this part of my mom's book. So there's two ways you can try and date this. The first is to date genes associated with the loss of hair in general. And with evolutionary clocks, that goes to about, at a minimum, 1 to 1.5 million years ago. There's another creative way to date pubic hair, which is to look at the date at which the head louse diverges from the pubic louse. Chimps have one louse their whole body. Gorillas, one louse their whole body. Humans have two. And those species diverge 3.5 million years ago. So that's an upper limit. So that's our range. And yeah, this is a time when a lot's going on in human evolution. We're moving out from the trees and into open spaces where things are hot.
Second, there was a comment from one of the most famous professors in the department. He said something really important, and this is the reason I gave the seminar, to get awesome insights like this. He pointed out that these three assumptions don't necessarily need to be true for Bill's idea to work. Like, if you know that you haven't had sex with your partner in the last 72 hours, and suddenly your partner smells like they have had sex, you know it wasn't with you. That's all you need to know. You know they cheated. So if you were going to do an experiment on pubic hair, establishing these assumptions might not be necessary. Better perhaps to just look at the mechanistics of pubic hair. Can it hold on to and disperse scents really well? Okay, one more question. Someone asked me, why do I think that primates and other apes haven't evolved pubic hair? Is it because they raise their children in groups and there's less need for pair bonds? Why don't primates have pubes?
I mean, there's some things we have to think about what's different about humans. I think there's two things here that are might be really relevant. One is that our children do take a long time to fend for themselves. Like I think a 3-year-old chimp's kind of ready to go. An 8-year-old or 10-year-old human is starting to be ready to go. So that amount of time where you might need multiple people looking after something might be a reason that pair bonds are a bit more important. Another factor here might be that, a chimp's entire body is kind of a scent trap. It's got hair everywhere. We have this pressure to lose our hair, and there might be a reason that it remains in one spot.
Okay. Thanks for joining me on this little adventure. I hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you next time, hopefully very, very soon.